Hello, and welcome to another episode of Mythic for Operators. Today, we're going to be looking at payloads. There are two different ways to get to the payload screen. You can either use the hamburger icon up here, go to Operational Data, and then Payloads, or you can use the same hazard icon up here and click Payloads. Now we're at the General Payloads page. This will show us all the payloads that we have already created with a wealth of information about them. So we can see the option to delete a payload. We can see the build progress for what happened as the payload was being created. So this is agent specific, and you can see each individual step as well as a status of what happened each time. So we have the gathering files, compiling, and optionally passing Apollo through Donut. If you click any of these, you can see the start and end time with how long the actual step took, the same status, information, all this sort of stuff that we saw in previous videos whenever we generated the payloads themselves. You can click to download, you can see the file name, description. This description is a little bit unique for Mythic in that this description associated with the payload is used to automatically populate the description for a callback based on this payload. This makes it easy to track what callbacks come from which payloads as you go through and you generate and laterally move and do more things in an environment. Over here we can see what C2 profiles are associated with this payload type, as well as the status of the C2 profile itself. This green check mark shows us that the C2 profile Docker container is running and the internal web server within that Docker container is also running. You can see that status here. We can see what agent that this payload is associated with. And if you click here, this little information button for more details, you can get way more specific information about the configuration and build parameters for this payload. We can see the same payload type, what operating system it's for, when it was created. If you want to download just this payload without clicking that button in the UI, you can always use this link here. We can see the SHA-1 and MD5 hashes for this payload. Over here, we're seeing the build parameters and information associated with building the payload itself. Apollo only had one build parameter, which was specifying whether we wanted to generate an executable or shellcode. So here we can see we selected Windows executable. Again, we can see these same build steps. We can see all the HTTP profile parameters that we specified whenever we built. Our domain, callback intervals, ports. We selected to use an AES-256 key, and here it is, if we need to use that for something else. We can see what HTTP headers and all sorts of stuff is associated with it. We can also see what commands we selected to build into this payload. So you can see these down here, and of course for any one of these, we can click the docs button and get brought to the internal documentation for that command. Now you can see here there's a Mythic version and a loaded version. The loaded version is the version of this command that's baked inside of this payload. If at some point later on, the developer for one of these commands updates the version and you reinstall or update that container, then you'll see this version be different from your loaded version and the row will be highlighted to indicate to you that, hey, you are now using an outdated version of this command. Kind of handy. Now there's a lot of other things that we can do with payloads. So if we look at this actions button, we can rename the file, of course, we can edit the description. This one here is a little interesting. If you have a webhook container installed, anytime you get a new callback, an event will get sent to that webhook container and you'll get like a Slack notification or in Discord or whatever it is that you have set up. By default, every payload that generates a new callback will trigger this alerting process. If you want to stop that for any specific payload, you can click this Stop Alerting to New Callbacks, and we'll see that this is no longer the case. So any new callback based off of this specific payload will not generate a webhook alert. If we want to change it back, we can of course just toggle it here. This is really useful if you're trying to do things like testing that a payload is working and you don't want to see those notifications over and over again as you're testing things out or embedding shellcode into other payloads and stuff like that. We can of course see the build standard out and errors as we're going through. With Apollo, it's doing a mono compilation with the Visual Studio Solution file. So we can see all the kind of build steps and information happening here. It's a nice way to kind of keep that available, but out of the way as you go through and you build agents. If there were build errors, you can see this here. If, for example, you want to generate a new version of this binary, this is usually helpful if you need to tweak something about the agent code itself, and you want to generate a new binary that utilizes all the same configuration parameters, but just the new actual agent code. You can simply click Trigger New Build, and we'll see this goes through to just start building a new payload for you. Of course, we can go through and we can also export the payload's configuration. So if we click this, we'll automatically download, and we can see just kind of the configuration that was used to generate this Apollo agent. So here we have that same description, the type. For C2 profiles, we have HTTP, and these are all the same parameters that we're looking at before, the same build parameters, the commands that we have loaded in, all the same information that we're able to pull out elsewhere. But by being able to export it means that we're able to then import it and generate payloads off of it. This is a handy way to kind of pre-create or pre-define what you want a payload to look like. And then you can simply use actions, import payload config, and we can select this configuration that we just exported, say submit, and we'll trigger a new build with those parameters. It's pretty helpful, so you don't have to necessarily go through each step in the UI and pick things dynamically. You can just pre-configure things and do it as you need. Now, of course, we can also go through and ask the C2 profile to do some things on our behalf based off of this payload. So here we're asking the C2 profile, in this case HTTP, asking it to generate some Apache mod rewrite rules for us based off of our configuration parameters. So here we can see we get some, rewrite engine on, we can see these conditions getting set. You have a couple things you need to do. For example, changing out the C2 server here with where you want your proper traffic to go, and replacing redirect with where you want redirected traffic to go. But this is a handy start with all this data kind of pre-populated based off of what you selected whenever you built your agent. There are a couple other things we can do. You can check your agent configuration against the C2 configuration. So here we can see both the agent and our C2 profile container are expecting to communicate over port 80 with no SSL. Perfect. Everything is good for our agent to connect back. We can also generate some IOCs. So we're again asking the HTTP container, what are some indicators of compromise specific to this agent's configuration? Here we can see our example.com with port 80, the things that we configured for our agent, as well as our /index with a query parameter of Q and the /data. This makes it kind of easy to see what network defenders or anybody might be looking for whenever it comes to your agent. We can also generate sample message. So this is more helpful if you're trying to do development, but you can get an idea of what traffic might look like based off of this C2 profile. So here we can see for HTTP, we would be doing a GET request to /index, Q equals, and then some base64 string asking for this data with a specified user agent of this. Similarly, for the post requests, they'd be going to /data with this user agent. And here's just examples that you can see. Makes it kind of easy to make sure that your traffic looks like you expect it to be. The last thing I'll mention here is this ability to generate a callback. So this is more for testing and agent development, but it can still be useful if you have things like a web shell, for example. So what this does is it tells Mythic that there should be a callback based off of this payload. Now, there won't actually be a callback running unless you go through and have something kind of like a web shell that's listening for things. Nothing will be beaconing out to Mythic asking for tasking. But this allows you to kind of pre-create that callback that we'll be looking at in future videos, and then start interacting with your kind of fake agent that way. You don't have to provide all these fields. You can provide as few or as many as you want. You click submit, and you can see, look, we have a new callback with some bogus data. So we didn't specify a domain, so it's @unknown. There's no username, no PID, so 0, just some basic data that's here that you can start playing around with the agent and seeing what commands look like and parameters look like and all that sort of information. You can also go through and with this kind of actions button, show deleted payloads. So by default, all deleted payloads are hidden from you. But if you want to go through and view them and maybe restore them or not, these options are here for you. So example, you can click restore, it's now back, and you can of course toggle delete again. Now, if you click restore, it's not actually like recreating the payload. The binary on disk is still deleted the first time that you click that delete button. But if a payload is deleted, you can't generate new callbacks based on it. So if you need to then allow new callbacks based off of a payload that you kind of marked as deleted in the UI, you can always click restore and get that functionality back. And of course, if you don't want to see these, you can click hide deleted payloads and kind of make things a bit cleaner for you to see. So that's generally the sorts of things that you can do with payloads themselves. In a future video, we'll look at once you have a callback, how do you interact with it and what kinds of things can you do there?